Hey, I'm Benjamin Verbicek, and I'm the lead pastor of Community Evangelical Free Church. I'm also the managing editor for Gospel-Centered Discipleship, and I'm coming to you today in our third installment of what we're calling the Writer's Coaching Corner, where each month I get in front of the camera and I talk about one article, well, specifically one paragraph in one article that appeared in our website the previous month. And what we do is we zoom in on that article and we talk about what's going on in that article that's so helpful, and how do we as writers get some of that same goodness into our own writing. And so the principle we're going to talk about this month is this: good writing tailors prose to a particular audience. Good writing tailors prose to a particular audience. And so before we go over to the paragraph on our website, I want to just set the framework with a verse from the Bible. So Proverbs chapter 25, verse 11 says that a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. Now, I don't really know what it means when it says apples of gold and settings of silver, except to say something artistic, something with craftsmanship, something with beauty, like jewelry-like. It's expensive, it's rare, and it's beautiful. And so a word spoken fitly at the right time to the right audience in the right way is all of that: expensive, rare, beautiful, and a blessing to the beholder. And so to talk about all of that, let's go over to our GCD website here. And as we go down, the featured article, at least right now, is From Mom and Dad to Our Grad. This is written by Jen Oshman. And Jen has been a writer with GCD for a number of years. She's one of our staff writers, which means she's a regular contributor and sits on our staff meetings and helps out. She's also an author with Crossway. Enough About Me, and working on a second book, and that'll be out later, and a podcast that she hosts, and all sorts of things. But right here, we're talking about her article that she wrote to her daughter with her husband. Now, her husband's a pastor, and she's a pastor's wife, and they're former missionaries and all of that. But here in this article, they're just mom and dad, writing to their daughter who just graduated. And like right from the beginning, it's tugging my heartstrings. I felt like when I opened this up to edit it and get it ready for publication, I thought, man, this is like those Facebook posts that just come in and say, a 2-year reminder, or a 4-year reminder, 8 years. And you just look at your kids when they were younger and you think, man, I'm like 3 days away, it feels like, from being where Jen is. But they wrote this good article to their daughter, and so that's what the introduction does. It sets it up to say they're going to write to the daughter they love, and each paragraph of the next few have these clusters of words that begin in bold and italics and talk about what she's going to write. And I just want to choose the initial one and read it in its entirety. It goes like this: You are not your academic performance or your future job title. There's an overwhelming temptation in our society to equate who we are with what we do. We see one another as job titles, degree letters, and college majors, but this is a categorical mistake. We are human beings, not human doings. Clever turn of phrase. Maybe others have said that. I had never heard that. Resist the urge to validate yourself or others by replacing who you are with what you do. You and all your future college classmates and career colleagues are precious, unique, irreplaceable human beings in the image of God, made in the image of God. Each person's worth and dignity is automatically immeasurable because of the God who made us. And more than that, because you are redeemed by Jesus, your standing before God in heaven is perfect, righteous, and good. You are already loved, cherished, and fully accepted by the one who made you. No test grade or class rank or job offer will ever change that. The pressure is off. You have nothing to prove and nothing to lose. Your life is hidden with Christ in God. You have been transferred permanently from the kingdom of His beloved Son into the kingdom of His beloved Son. No failure, no sin, no circumstance in all of heaven or earth can take that away. What a beautiful thing to say to your own daughter as she's flying out of the nest, so to speak, as going off to college. And they're the sort of things I'd want to say to my daughter. I have a couple of them, and I have a couple sons. And so I love the article. I think it's good prose all the way through. It's good, solid biblical advice. But especially, I think what makes this piece so helpful is it's written to a particular audience. It's tailoring the gospel encouragement to a particular audience. Now, let's talk about that. In this case, it is Jen's daughter. I don't know her name. I don't know if this was originally read to her. But here, what's happening is we've taken this thing that's to her daughter but posted it on our website, which is to say the audience is much broader than her website. But by going through that window of one particular person, or two particular people written to one particular person, I think a beautiful thing happens. It's what we would call an open letter. You're probably familiar with that term. But an open letter is like, to illustrate it, I could write a letter to President Biden, and I could write to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and send it to his house, which is the Capitol, the White House, which is also where he works. So he's been working from home. The presidents have been working home long before that was cool. So I could write him a letter there, or I could write him a letter to the Washington Post and say, Dear President Biden, and I don't know anybody at the Washington Post, so I don't think it's going to get published. But that would be an open letter. It's written to someone, but with the full knowledge that others are looking on. That's sort of what Jen is doing here. As well, I think that's actually what Paul is doing with 1 Timothy. He's writing, of course, to Timothy, this young pastor in Ephesus, but he's also writing, I think, and this would take more time to tease out, with the knowledge that that particular church is watching. Not just our church or your church, future churches, but I think that particular church, it's an open letter to Timothy. Timothy is supposed to read it, but read it in the presence of his whole church. And so I think really beautiful things happen when we know particularly who we're writing to. And you see this true with the other New Testament letters, even though they're not what I would call open letters in that regard. They're written to one particular place. But just think about the way you can't interchange letters. Like, what I mean is you can't take Galatians and change the title and put it on Philippians and have it mean the same thing. And vice versa. You can't take the letter written to the Philippian church and title it Galatians. Like with what we know about Acts, about these two different churches, or Thessalonica for that matter. Like it matters who it is that's writing it and who it is the person's writing to, because tailoring words to a particular audience is what makes for good writing. In seminary, we called this a word on target, like that the biblical words are words on target. A good example of this I have here, Before You Lose Your Faith, Deconstructing Doubt in the Church. And this is a book edited by Ivan Mesa, written by the Gospel Coalition, or published by the Gospel Coalition. A number of different contributors, Trevin Wax and so on, authors you would be familiar with. But it's written to those who are deconstructing their faith, which is to say they're struggling with what was, they thought, a Christian faith, and how does the Christian faith intersect with sexuality and social justice and issues of race and science and so on and so forth. But the whole book, rather than just speaking to me as a pastor who might have people in my congregation who are dealing with these things, the whole book is written directly to the audience that's actually struggling with these things. So just to give you one example, the last chapter here, Derek Rishmawi says, if you've come to the end of this book, so like a particular person, if you've come to the end of this book, you're either thinking about deconstructing your faith or worried about about how to talk to folks who are. So like, in other words, like there's a particular audience here in mind, those deconstructing your faith, or if you have a friend or family member who's deconstructing your faith, this book is for you. And I think that's one of the things that makes the book so helpful. We'll come over here to my website. I have a blog, and this isn't a commercial for my blog, although here it is, and fanandflame.com or benjaminverbicek.com. If you want to go here, you can subscribe. You can be one of the elite handful of people that subscribe to my blog. If you want to be some of the few and the proud, you can do that here. But that's not what this is about. My latest post, I did a review, Without Theological Triage, You Drive a Car of Glass, which has to do with this book and this post, so a review of Before You Lose Your Faith. But the paragraph I want to read comes from right here. This is why, speaking that the book itself is talking to a particular audience, this is why I appreciated the tone each contributing author uses throughout the book, speaking to readers with the assumption that they are in some stage of deconstruction. Too often Christians talk past the very people we are ostensibly talking with to score points with our tribe. The tribe we imagine listening over our shoulder and cheering us on as we own our opponents. Before You Lose Your Faith is not out to own anyone. The book speaks with consistent compassion to the real issues of those losing their faith and overwhelmed with doubt. And I think that's what makes the book so helpful, is that it's not out to own anyone. It's talking to the real people who are really struggling, which is such a Christian thing to do. You think about it, what the converse being how unchristian it is to leap over people that you're actually talking to on the other end of the camera, or on the other end of that blog post, or the other end of the pages of that book, and like leap over them to talk back to your tribe, which is to say, to use people. Christians are servants, first and foremost. Once saved in the gospel, we're sinners, saved in the gospel, to then be servants of God and servants of people. And one of the ways we do that is by writing particular words to the particular people in front of us. So I think Before You Lose Your Faith is a good example of that. Another good example, of course, is Gentle and Lowly. Now, most of you could pull this book off your shelf, and Dr. Ortlund just does such a fantastic job, or it's on your phone, you've listened to the audiobook or have the ebook, or all three. But I think in all the conversations about what makes this book so helpful, one of the underrated things that I haven't heard talked about as much is the introduction, where Dr. Ortlund spells out who it is he's writing to. And so just to read a sentence or two in the opening pages, and I'll just say, I started tearing up this morning as I was re-looking at this. The second paragraph, he says, "This book is written for the discouraged, the frustrated, the weary, the disenchanted, the cynical, the empty, those running on fumes, those whose Christian lives feel like constantly running up a descending escalator. Those of us who find ourselves thinking, how could I mess up that bad again?" And he goes on teasing that out and summarizes it this way. It is written, this book is written, in other words, for normal Christians. In short, it is for sinners and sufferers. How does Jesus feel about them? And I think that clear conception of who it is he's writing to is one of the things that makes the book so compelling. And in fact, the theme verse, of course, is Matthew 11:28. "Come to me all who are weary, and I will give you rest," Jesus says. But just a chapter or two before that in Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, or like we read, that Jesus, seeing the crowds, that they were harassed and helpless, he had compassion on them. So it's not just Dr. Ortlund that knows who his audience is, but of course it's Jesus who knows us as we really are, as sinners and sufferers. And so that's one reason I think that book is so helpful. And when I say tailor your words to a particular audience, I mean that specifically in two ways. The way you speak to your audience's sin and their salvation. Try and be as particular as you can, which is one of the reasons I think Jen writes so helpfully to her daughter. Like, one, she knows her daughter, but she knows what it means to be a high school graduate and to be launched out into the world. And I think, as I remember her book, Enough About Me, she talks about her own conversion story and what it means to be launched into college and to have parts of life fall apart. And so I just think she knows her audience, both in our sin and what it means to be saved from those particular sins. And so I want to read you something I wrote that I think will help keep the gospel large and round. You might think being universal and generic with our gospel application would help us experience the gospel as big as it really is. But applying the gospel in generic and broad ways is what, over time, makes the gospel feel small, as though it only applies in the abstract. Conversely, making our writing as particular as possible when it comes to sin and salvation in a counterintuitive way makes the gospel large and round, at least our experience of it. Which of course it is large and round. It's big gospel. It's bigger on the inside, as we read in Narnia. The last book, The Last Battle. Continuing, each time we apply the gospel in a narrow way shows another type of person the gospel applies to him. In this way, Sunday after Sunday, blog post after blog post, newsletter after newsletter, book after book, the cumulative effect of tailoring our writing to a particular audience has a way of creating a large, expansive, and high-res image of the gospel. Or to say it another way, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. To give you one resource to help you think through how to do this well in your writing, this Going back to the GCD website, over here on the side, we have an advertisement for Jen's podcast, but also we have the Writers Mentoring Cohort on the side. And this is a 6-month program where we come alongside writers and encourage them and give assignments and bring in some experts like Jared Wilson or Jonathan Dodson or Hannah Anderson. And I've been a part of it. They limit it to 12 or 13, 14 people, and you go for 6 months. But one of the assignments is to write a letter to a non-Christian, someone you actually know, and how the gospel speaks to the things they're struggling with. And this was all fresh on the brain, this topic, because I was recently editing through some of those letters, just giving encouragements. And so it just reminded me of the importance of knowing your audience and how to speak to them. Another thing to think about is the Gospel Centered Discipleship website takes submissions. So if you want to write something, want to submit it, you can find our guidelines on our website. But I want to say, if you can submit the article to us or post it on your blog or send it to TGC or Desiring God or For the Church or 9 Marks or wherever you want to send something, or your church newsletter, and you don't have to change a thing, I want to say you probably haven't written it well. It's probably not tailored to a particular audience. And so become familiar with that audience if you want to write for them. That's one thing you can do before you submit to TGC or Desiring God or whoever, especially us, the Gospel Centered Discipleship website. And just to give you another tip to try and do that well, you could take whatever you're writing and hit enter and move it down a space and then write dear and then just fill in the blank, whether it's dear struggler, dear suffering Christian, dear Sally or Jane or Jessica or John Doe or like whoever these people that you know, friends or family, and write whatever it is you're going to write particular. Dear misogynistic, patriarchal, abusive pastor, and then write that, and then delete at the top that, and we'll just see what comes from when you have this clear conception of your audience. I think that really good writing will come out of that. And so another resource, I like to end with a resource just to encourage you. This is How to Write Short by Roy Peter Clark. He's an expert writing coach. I love all of his books. I've read almost all of them a couple times. This one is Wordcraft for Fast Times. He writes near the end, page 212, understand your audience. With knowledge of readers and their needs, the writer translates jargon, builds definitions based on what is already known, and leads an audience to greater clarity and new knowledge. And so this would be a great resource just generally if you're wanting to improve in your writing, but he also has a few things to say about knowing your audience. And so thanks for watching. I appreciate it. I love these opportunities to get in front of a camera and talk about writing. And if you know another writer that might benefit from these, please share that, email it, pass it on, share it on social media. We'd love to spread the word. So we'll see you next month.